Welcome to Kedah, Malaysia, a place people around here call the nation's rice bowl. Forget the noise and congestion of big cities. Out here, it's just endless stretches of paddy fields, a sea of green rolling out as far as the eye can see. Life moves slowly, peacefully, and just off the coast sits Langkawi, one of the most famous resort islands in the world, drawing millions of visitors every year who come looking for exactly that, a little stillness, a little escape. But in 2006, something happened that shattered all of that. A case so shocking, so disturbing, that it yanked Kedah straight into the national spotlight and kept it there. A 24-year-old woman went out for a run and never came home. Her body was found quickly. The evidence pointing to a suspect? There was plenty of it. But the suspect's background, who he was, who his family was, made everything infinitely more complicated. The investigation stumbled. The prosecution struggled. And what should have been a straightforward murder case dragged on for a grueling 18 years before it was finally resolved. And along the way authorities handled the entire thing, the investigation, the trial, all of it, set off a firestorm of outrage that swept across the entire country. To this day, people are still talking about it. This is one of the most infamous, most controversial murder cases in Malaysian history. This is the case of Chee Gaik Yap. Chee Gaik Yap was born in 1981, the third of 6 children. Everyone who knew her described her the same way, outgoing, warm, full of life. She was tall, fair-skinned, and so naturally beautiful that her family and friends had a nickname for her, the Great Beauty. Her father, Chee Sao, was a carpenter. Her mother, Lim Seo Lien, stayed home to raise the kids. They weren't wealthy by any stretch. The family rented a modest government-subsidized apartment in Sungai Petani, a working-class district in Kedah. But none of that stopped Chee Gaik Yap. She was driven, disciplined, and sharp. Out of all 6 kids in her family, she was the only one who made it to university, graduating with a bachelor's degree in business administration from University Utara, Malaysia, the University of Northern Malaysia. And she wasn't just book smart. She was passionate about photography, played basketball, and trained in Taekwondo, earning herself a black belt, which is no small thing. To stay in shape, she jogged regularly at a park near her home. After graduation, she landed a job as a marketing executive at a manufacturing company. And her bosses clearly saw something special in her. They were already making plans to send her to Germany for advanced training. Everything was pointing up. Her whole future was wide open in front of her. But just 1 week before she was supposed to leave for Germany, the unthinkable happened. At 24 years old, Chee Gaik Yap's life was cut short in the most brutal, senseless way imaginable. It was around 5 in the evening on May 14, 2006. Chee Gaik Yap's younger sister, Chee Gaik Chun, had wanted their mom to come along for a run, but their mother was busy and couldn't make it. So Chee Gaik Yap hopped on her motorcycle and rode her sister over to the Cinta Sayang Golf Club, about a mile from their home, to get in some exercise. Now, Chee Gaik Yap was the more athletic of the two. She had more stamina, more speed, and she quickly pulled ahead, disappearing from her sister's sight as she rounded the path. Chee Gaik Chun kept jogging on her own. At some point, she noticed a black pickup truck fly past her. Then, a few minutes later, it came back around, sped past her again, and was gone. When Chee Gaik Chun finished her lap and went to meet up with her sister, Chee Gaik Yap was nowhere to be found. She waited. She figured maybe her sister had gotten bored, headed home early. It didn't seem that alarming at first, so she rode her scooter back. But the moment she got home and realized her sister still wasn't there, that's when the panic hit. Something felt wrong. She turned right back around and raced to where they'd been running. Her sister wasn't there, but something else was: a hair tie, a pair of running shoes, and a pool of blood on the ground. Her gut told her this was bad, really bad. She spotted a police patrol nearby and ran over to report what she'd found. What happened next is almost hard to believe. The officer looked at the blood on the ground and told her it was probably leftover from some old car accident. Then he drove away. Just like that. No investigation, no follow-up, nothing. Chee Gaik Chun didn't have a cell phone, so she had no choice but to go home and tell her mother what she'd seen. The family called the police themselves. A search team of 40 officers was assembled, joined by Chee Gaik Yap's family and friends, and they combed the surrounding area. But the search didn't go on for long, because 9 hours after she disappeared, at around 2:30 in the morning, a passerby stumbled onto something horrifying. A motorcyclist traveling through a nearby area spotted a body lying in thick bushes off the road. A woman. Her upper clothing was soaked through with blood, pulled up to her neck, leaving only a black bra. Her lower body was completely exposed. The man was terrified. He called the police immediately. Officers rushed to the scene and confirmed what everyone was dreading. It was Chee Gaik Yap. The autopsy results were devastating. Forensic experts determined she had been struck hard on the head with a blunt object. Her body had been stabbed more than 50 times. The wound that killed her was a single stab near her neck, roughly 6 inches deep, deep enough to reach bone. It was a horrific, vicious attack, and it didn't stop there. Examination of her body revealed tearing consistent with sexual assault, and semen was recovered, confirming she had been raped before she was killed. For the Chee family, the grief was absolutely unbearable. At the cremation ceremony, her father, Chee Sao, broke down so completely that he tried to throw himself toward the incinerator to stop his daughter from being cremated. Anyone who was there said it was one of the most heartbreaking things they had ever witnessed. Police wasted no time putting together a special investigation team. 3 days after the murder, they pulled in 6 male employees from the golf club, ranging in age from 20 to 54, for questioning. But when the DNA results came back, not a single one of them matched the DNA recovered from Chee Gaik Yap's body. They were all released. Investigators kept pushing, expanding their list, testing 12 more suspects. Again, nothing. Every lead dried up. Every angle hit a wall. The case was going nowhere. And as the weeks turned into months with no arrests, ugly rumors started circulating that the Chee family had been paid off by the killer, that they'd quietly settled the whole thing behind closed doors. Chee Gaik Yap's father came out and flat out denied every single one of those rumors. The family refused to let it go. They organized awareness campaigns. Members of the public rallied alongside them, pushing the police to keep digging, keep trying. But without any new evidence, the momentum faded. Eventually, investigators did what no family ever wants to hear. They classified it as a cold case, an unsolved mystery, and then time just kept moving. 3 years passed. Then, in 2009, detectives decided to take another hard look at the case. They went back through their list of persons of interest, brought everyone back in for fresh questioning, and ran a new round of DNA tests. And this time, they got a hit. The DNA from one of the suspects matched semen samples collected from Chee Gaik Yap's body. It was a breakthrough, but there was a catch, and it was a significant one. Other DNA had also been recovered from her body that did not match this suspect. That detail, that one loose thread, would come back to haunt this case in a massive way. The suspect's name was Sharil Jafar, 28 years old at the time. But Sharil, who also went by Sarin, was not your average person of interest. His father, Dato Jafar, was a wealthy and well-connected jeweler who specialized in opal and meteorite pieces, doing business regularly between Malaysia and Australia. Now, Dato is a prestigious title in Malaysia. It's bestowed directly by the king or a state ruler, and it signals serious social standing. People with that title tend to have influence, connections, and reach. Growing up in that world, Sarin's life had been, by most accounts, pretty smooth. At the time of the murder, he lived not far from the crime scene, worked at a local car dealership, and had a wife and a young child. When police first brought him in for a DNA swab, he seemed cooperative enough. But just 4 days later, his family posted bail. And on that very same day, the same day he walked out, he boarded a flight to Australia and secured permanent residency there. He was gone, and it sure didn't look like he was planning to come back. Police had no choice but to add his name to their wanted list. And once again, the case went cold. Months turned into years with no movement. Then, on May 17, 2012, 3 days after the 6th anniversary of Chee Gaik Yap's murder, Sarin suddenly flew back to Malaysia from Australia. Nobody knows exactly why he came back, but he never got the chance to find out what would happen next on his own terms. Before he even made it out of the airport, a team of officers was waiting for him. He was arrested on the spot. Police charged him immediately with the murder of Chee Gaik Yap, and if convicted, there was only one sentence on the table: death. On May 25, 2013, Saren stood trial at the High Court in Alor Setar, the heart of Kedah, right where the crime had taken place. The courtroom was packed, public interest was through the roof. People had waited years for this moment, and now it was finally here. The prosecution's two strongest pieces of evidence were the semen DNA recovered from Chee Gaik Yap's body and the vehicle that Chee Gaik Chun had seen speeding past her that evening. Based on her detailed description, police had identified it as a Kia Nazaria, a multi-purpose vehicle, registered in Saren's name. Forensic pathologist Dr. Mohammed Suhani took the stand and walked the court through exactly what had happened to Chee Gaik Yap. She was first struck hard on the head with a blunt object, leaving her dazed and disoriented. Then, while she was still on her feet, she was stabbed in the neck. She died from massive blood loss. The likely weapon was a double-edged knife. The doctor couldn't say with certainty whether one person or multiple people were involved, but one thing was confirmed without any doubt. Chee Gaik Yap had been sexually assaulted before she was killed. By every measure, it seemed like the evidence was there. The DNA, the car, the forensic testimony. Everyone watching felt the same way. This was enough. This had to be enough. And then the judge spoke. In June 2013, the court delivered a verdict that left the entire nation speechless. Saren was acquitted, released, right there from the courtroom. The judge cited insufficient conclusive evidence and laid out 3 reasons. First, the car's windows were heavily tinted, making it impossible to definitively place Saren behind the wheel. Second, 5 separate DNA profiles had been recovered from Chee Gaik Yap's body, and only 4 of them matched Saren. That, the judge said, raised the possibility of a third party or multiple perpetrators. And third, the actual cause of death was the stab wound to the neck. DNA, the judge argued, could only prove that some form of intimate contact had occurred. It could not prove that Saren was the one who attacked her or took her life. The reaction inside that courtroom was immediate and raw. Chee Gaik Yap's father couldn't hold it together. The moment the verdict was read, he completely lost control. He tried to throw himself off the courthouse balcony. Reporters nearby grabbed him just in time, pulling him back from the edge. Meanwhile, on the other side of the room, Saren looked like a man who had never doubted the outcome for a second. He was smiling. He walked out of that courtroom and threw his arms around his family like he was celebrating. That image, a grieving father being pulled back from a ledge while the man accused of killing his daughter grinned for the cameras, burned itself into the public consciousness. Politicians publicly voiced their disgust. Ordinary people were furious. How, everyone demanded to know, had the judge looked at all of that evidence and still walked him free? The debate that followed was loud, angry, and it was just getting started. In the days and weeks that followed, the public and the media started tearing the case apart, and the more they looked, the more questions piled up. First, after Saren was bailed out, how did he manage to just leave the country? Malaysia and Australia actually have an extradition treaty. Australia can refuse a request, sure, but the key word there is request. Malaysia has to make one first. So did they? Did Malaysian police ever formally ask Australia to send him back? Because if they didn't, that raised some very uncomfortable questions about how hard anyone was actually trying. Second, Chee Gaik Yap's body showed unmistakable signs of sexual assault, and the overwhelming majority of the DNA recovered matched Saren. If this was almost certainly a rape and murder, why had the prosecutor never charged him with rape? Why was murder the only charge on the table? Third, even if you accepted the theory that multiple people were involved, even if there really was another perpetrator out there whose DNA was never identified, did that mean the one person you had caught, the one with matching DNA, just gets to walk? How does that make sense? And fourth, whose was that other DNA sample? Why had police never disclosed it publicly? Had they seriously investigated it at all, or had that thread simply been left hanging? The anger that swept through Malaysia after that verdict was unlike anything the case had seen before. People didn't just feel sad for Chee Gaik Yap, they felt the system had betrayed her. Public trust in the Malaysian justice system took a serious hit. The phrase on everyone's lips was simple and brutal: money talks. The widespread belief was that Saren hadn't walked because he was innocent. He'd walked because his family had the kind of money and connections that made inconvenient things disappear. People couldn't stomach it. Organizations mobilized, protests broke out. Social media campaigns spread rapidly, collecting thousands upon thousands of signatures demanding that Saren be prosecuted for rape. The biggest and most powerful of these movements was called Justice for Chee Gaik Yap, Review the Judicial Verdict. It went nationwide, and by the end, it had gathered over 80,000 signatures, all of them directed at the Attorney General's chambers, all of them demanding that someone stand up and fight for her. At one of the rallies, a protester showed up dressed as Bao Cheng-ten, a legendary Chinese magistrate, a symbol of incorruptible justice, and laid flowers at a memorial for Chee Gaik Yap. The message was clear: where is the person with the courage to do what's right? The Chee family had no intention of giving up. They turned to one of the most formidable legal figures in the country, Karpal Singh. If you know Malaysian legal history, you know that name. Karpal Singh was a giant, a lawyer and politician who had earned the nickname the Tiger of Jelutong. He had spent decades throwing himself into the most difficult, high-stakes cases in the country, never backing down, never flinching, no matter who was on the other side. His record in both law and politics was extraordinary. He was, by any measure, a legend. The public pinned their hopes on him. If anyone could cut through the fog and get justice for Chee Gaik Yap, it was Karpal Singh. He took the case, committing to provide legal counsel and to hold the entire process accountable, to make sure that whatever happened next was transparent and fair. But then, in 2014, before the case reached its conclusion, Karpal Singh was killed in a traffic accident. It was a devastating blow to his family, to his clients, and to everyone who had believed in what he stood for. His son, Ram Karpal Singh, also a lawyer and a politician, stepped in. He picked up where his father had left off and kept fighting for Chee Gaik Yap. In July 2013, with pressure mounting from every direction, the prosecution finally filed an appeal against Saren's acquittal. The deputy public prosecutor stood before the court and made the argument plainly. The overwhelming majority of the DNA taken from Chee Gaik Yap's body belonged to Saren. That alone was enough to establish an undeniable link between him and the crime. As for the anomalous DNA samples that had caused so much confusion, the prosecution had an explanation for that too. Chee Gaik Yap's body had been left outdoors for hours. It had been moved. In that time, environmental contamination was not just possible, it was likely. That stray DNA wasn't evidence of a second perpetrator. It was evidence of a crime scene that had been exposed to the elements. And then there was the question that hung over everything else. If Saren truly had nothing to hide, why did he bolt to Australia the moment police started closing in on him? In October 2014, the Court of Appeal sided with the prosecution. The earlier acquittal was thrown out. A retrial was ordered. Saren was told to surrender his bail. For the Chee family, it felt like the first real breath of hope in a long time. The case was officially reopened in December of that same year, and Saren was back in the dock, still insisting he hadn't done it. But this time around, the story he told was something else entirely. It was so far-fetched, so riddled with holes, that it was almost hard to follow with a straight face. He claimed that around the time of the murder, he'd been feeling emotionally overwhelmed, so he'd reached out to a friend, a guy he called Vin, and asked him to set him up with a woman, non-Malay, around 20 years old. The next day, Vin came through. The woman he introduced Saren to turned out to be Chee Gaik Yap. According to Saren, the two of them met near the golf club, had consensual, unprotected sex in his car. 5 minutes, he said, and then he paid her 356 ringgit as compensation. After that, she walked away on her own. That was the last he saw of her. He then got a call from his mother, drove to the golf club to pick her up after her round, and only found out about Chee Gaik Yap's murder the next morning when he read it in the newspaper. As for Vin, his friend had gone completely unreachable. The police's rebuttal was methodical and damning. They pointed out, one by one, exactly why Saren's story didn't hold up. A paid sexual encounter happening out in the open, in broad daylight, by the side of a road? Wildly implausible. And even if you somehow granted that premise, Saren's claim that he didn't use protection? Even harder to believe. But the most powerful piece of the rebuttal had nothing to do with logic. It had to do with paperwork. Back in 2012, Saren's own father, Dato Jafar, had given police a signed statement. In it, he admitted that he and his wife had helped their son dispose of the murder weapon, throwing it into a dumpster at a night market, and that they had sold the car Saren had been driving on the day of the killing. That statement had his signature on it. But now, standing in court, Dato Jafar told a completely different story. He said he knew nothing about any of it. The car was sold simply because they wanted an upgrade. The contradiction was glaring and obvious. The prosecution pushed hard, and the judge agreed. Every piece of Dato Jafar's revised testimony was ruled inadmissible. On January 9, 2015, the judge looked at the evidence and made his decision. Saren was guilty of murder. The sentence was death by hanging, to be carried out on a date to be determined. When the Chee family heard those words, they exhaled, finally. But the relief was cautious, fragile. They had been here before, in a sense. They knew the fight might not be over yet. And sure enough, Saren wasn't done fighting. He appealed in 2016, rejected. He appealed again in 2018, rejected again. By all rights, the case should have been closed. The verdict had held through 2 rounds of appeals. Justice, slow and grinding as it had been, appeared to have finally landed. But then, in October 2018, something happened that nobody saw coming. Something that threw the entire outcome back into question. Just 9 months after Saren's second appeal was denied, the Malaysian government floated a proposal that would affect every single person sitting on death row in the country: the abolition of the mandatory death penalty. Now, it's important to be clear about what that actually means, because it doesn't mean abolishing the death penalty altogether. What it means is this: previously, under Malaysian law, a murder conviction came with one and only one sentence: death. No exceptions, no room for circumstances, no judicial discretion whatsoever. Under the proposed change, judges would gain the ability to weigh the specifics of a case and choose, either maintain the death sentence or commute it to a minimum of 30 years in prison plus caning. The moment that proposal was put on the table, the death sentences of over 1,100 inmates across the country were placed on hold. One of those inmates was Saren, and just like that, he had something he hadn't had in years: a lifeline. In another case that drew national attention, the mastermind behind a high-profile beauty queen kidnapping had his death sentence commuted to 45 years in prison plus caning under this very same provision. The public reaction was fierce. Victims' families felt the ground shifting under their feet all over again. For the Chee family, and for everyone who had spent years fighting for justice for Chee Gaik Yap, the idea that her killer might now escape the death penalty felt like a gut punch. All that time, all those years, all those signatures, protests, courtroom battles, and it might still not be enough. For Saren, though, this was nothing short of a gift. He filed another appeal, asking for his sentence to be reconsidered. In April 2023, Malaysia officially passed the abolition of the mandatory death penalty into law, with it taking effect in July of that year. On May 29, 2024, Saren finally got his day in court for the sentence review. His defense lawyer, Rosalind Kamarudin, asked the court to bring his sentence down to somewhere between 30 and 40 years. The arguments she made were exactly what you'd expect. Saren's father had recently passed away, which had been deeply painful for him. He had behaved well in prison. He had expressed remorse. And then she pointed to the beauty queen kidnapping case, where the sentence had been successfully reduced, and argued that since Saren had only been convicted of murder, one fewer crime than kidnapping, he certainly didn't deserve to die. The prosecution wasn't having any of it. They stood up and made clear that this case was in a category of its own. This wasn't some ambiguous, complicated set of circumstances. A young woman had been out for a jog, in a public place, in the middle of the day, and she had been hunted down, abducted, raped, stabbed over 50 times, and left in the bushes like she was nothing. Every shred of her dignity had been taken from her. This was not a case for leniency. On that same day, the Federal Court of Malaysia delivered its answer. All 3 judges were in complete agreement. What Saren had done was a crime of extraordinary cruelty, carried out in broad daylight, in a way that shocked the conscience of the public. The only appropriate punishment was death. The sentence stood. After every appeal, every legal maneuver, every delay, it was finally, truly over. Chee Gaik Yap's father was 67 years old by the time it ended. He had carried the weight of his daughter's murder for 18 years. In 2017, on top of everything else, he had been diagnosed with stage 2 lung lymphoma. Thankfully, his treatment went well and his health improved. And now, at last, with the man who killed his daughter out of options and out of time, he could begin, slowly, carefully, to let go. The case of Chee Gaik Yap is an 18-year story soaked in grief, rage, and some deeply uncomfortable questions about how justice works and who it works for. It's more than the story of a young woman brutally taken too soon and a family broken by that loss. It's a mirror held up to a legal system and everything that can go wrong inside it. Justice was late, agonizingly, infuriatingly late, but it came. For a father who had spent nearly 2 decades waiting, and for a public that had never stopped demanding accountability, it finally came. The name Chee Gaik Yap deserves to be remembered, not just as a victim, but as a reason to keep pushing for a system that is faster, fairer, and more transparent. Because no family should ever have to fight this hard for this long just to have their daughter's life matter. The truth, no matter how long it gets buried, has a way of eventually coming out. This video ends here. We'll see you in the next one.